When you respond to a narcissist in the right way, something eventually changes in the dynamic. The control they once seemed to have over you begins to weaken, and the person who depended on your attention, energy, and emotional reactions may no longer know how to influence you. Narcissists often depend heavily on external validation because their sense of self is unstable beneath the surface. They need other people to constantly reassure them, admire them, support them, and reinforce the image they have created of themselves. Without that outside attention, their confidence can quickly begin to collapse. This is why they often seek people who will provide emotional energy without asking too many questions. They may take advantage of someone's kindness, patience, loyalty, and compassion, simply to maintain their own sense of superiority and importance. A narcissist may treat people according to whatever benefits them in the moment. They can surround themselves with individuals who admire them, agree with them, defend them, or follow their instructions without questioning their behavior. What they often want is not genuine connection, but control, admiration, and obedience. They may create an environment where everyone around them feels pressured to accept their version of reality. In a committed relationship, the other person can eventually begin believing that keeping the narcissist happy is their responsibility. They may constantly adjust their behavior, avoid certain conversations, and surrender their own needs simply to prevent another conflict. Over time, this can make the victim feel trapped, as though there is no other option except to satisfy every demand placed before them. Behind the confident exterior, narcissistic behavior is often connected with deep insecurity. A person who constantly needs admiration may be terrified of being exposed, rejected, criticized, or viewed negatively. This can explain why narcissists are so sensitive when someone challenges the image they are trying to maintain. They may become defensive almost immediately because admitting fault threatens the identity they have constructed. If they have become accustomed to manipulating conversations, denying facts, or changing stories, even a simple question can feel like an attack. Instead of calmly addressing what happened, they may redirect the conversation, accuse you of causing the problem, or attempt to make you defend yourself. The goal is often to move attention away from their behavior and place it back onto you. At their core, narcissistic individuals can carry a great deal of emotional emptiness. When external stimulation disappears and they are left alone with their own thoughts, uncomfortable feelings may surface. This is one reason they can constantly search for attention, excitement, drama, admiration, or some new source of emotional stimulation. Silence can become uncomfortable because there is no audience available to reinforce their preferred self-image. Rather than sitting with those uncomfortable emotions and taking responsibility for them, they may look outward for someone to blame. When something goes wrong, they may quickly identify another person as the cause. If they attempt to confront you, intimidate you, or deliberately provoke an emotional reaction, your response becomes extremely important. You do not have to become aggressive to demonstrate that you are no longer an easy person to manipulate. Before we go further, thank you for spending your time with Narcissist Mind. If this video gives you a different perspective on narcissistic behavior and helps you understand what you have experienced, consider sharing it with someone who may need to hear this message. And if you are new here, subscribe to Narcissist Mind so you can stay connected with future videos about narcissistic behavior, manipulation, emotional control, and the psychology behind these difficult relationships. Now, let's begin with the first thing you need to understand. One of the most common weapons a narcissist can use is gaslighting. They may deliberately distort conversations, deny things that happened, rewrite events, or insist that you misunderstood everything in order to make you question your own perception. Gaslighting becomes dangerous when you start trusting their version of reality more than your own experience. The narcissist may repeatedly tell you that you are imagining things, being too sensitive, remembering incorrectly, or creating problems that do not exist. If you constantly accept these claims without examining what is actually happening, your confidence in your own judgment can slowly disappear. But you need to remember something important. Someone else's insistence does not automatically make their story true. You are allowed to recognize what you experienced. You are allowed to have your own perspective. You are allowed to disagree. When you refuse to let manipulation rewrite your understanding of events, you protect your sense of identity. You do not have to surrender your beliefs simply because another person speaks with confidence or demands that you accept their interpretation. The mistake many people make is believing they must defeat the narcissist in an argument. They think that if they explain themselves clearly enough, present enough evidence, or provide enough logical reasoning, the narcissist will eventually understand. Unfortunately, that expectation can keep you trapped in endless conversations. If someone is committed to protecting their image rather than discovering the truth, more explanations will not necessarily change their position. You can spend hours defending yourself and still end up being accused of something else. That is why you need to stop treating every disagreement as a battle you must win. You do not need their agreement to know what happened. You do not need their approval to trust yourself. And you certainly do not need to exhaust your emotional energy trying to convince someone who has already decided what they want to believe. When a narcissist attempts to pull you into an argument based on something you know is untrue, simplicity can become your greatest strength. You do not have to deliver a long speech defending yourself. You can answer briefly and calmly. A simple, "No, that isn't true," or "I don't agree," may be enough. Sometimes even acknowledging what they said without becoming emotionally involved is more effective than trying to prove your innocence for the 10th time. The important thing is not the exact phrase you use. The important thing is that you refuse to become emotionally trapped inside their narrative. Keep your voice steady. Do not rush to explain every detail. Do not allow their anger to determine your emotional state. The calmer you remain, the less material they have to use against you. You also need to become selective about the battles you enter. Not every accusation deserves an answer, and not every provocation deserves your attention. Narcissistic communication can become exhausting because there is often another argument waiting behind the first one. You answer one accusation, and suddenly there are 3 more. You explain one misunderstanding, and another version of the story appears. This is why minimal communication can protect your energy. You might hear statements such as, "That never happened," "You are making this up," or "I never said that." Instead of immediately becoming defensive, you can calmly state your position and stop there. You do not need to keep talking simply because they keep provoking you. Sometimes your silence communicates more strength than another 10 minutes of explanation ever could. Do not misunderstand this approach as weakness or submission. Staying quiet does not mean you agree with the narcissist, and remaining calm does not mean you are afraid. It means you are refusing to participate in a communication pattern designed to drain you. When someone is attempting to provoke anger, confusion, or desperation, your emotional reaction may become the reward they are looking for. If you remove that reward, the interaction can lose much of its power. You can be firm without becoming hostile. You can disagree without screaming. You can establish a boundary without explaining it 20 different ways. The less emotional fuel you provide to unnecessary conflict, the more control you regain over yourself. Your goal should not be to make the narcissist understand everything. Your goal should be to remain grounded enough that their behavior no longer determines how you think, speak, or feel. The second important shift is to stop placing unrealistic expectations on the narcissist. This can be painful because many people remain attached to the version of the person they hoped would eventually appear. They remember the kindness, affection, promises, or moments of vulnerability, and believe that if they just love harder, communicate better, or remain patient enough, the relationship will eventually become what they imagined. But you have to evaluate people according to their consistent behavior, rather than the potential you see inside them. If someone repeatedly demonstrates dishonesty, cruelty, manipulation, disrespect, or emotional instability, believe the pattern. Do not keep expecting a completely different person to emerge simply because you desperately want that outcome. Realistic expectations protect you from repeatedly being shocked by behavior you have already witnessed. This is especially difficult for empathetic people because they naturally search for the good in others. They may think about someone's childhood, insecurities, wounds, fears, or difficult experiences, and use those things to explain harmful behavior. Understanding why someone behaves badly can create compassion, but compassion should never require you to ignore what their behavior is doing to you. You can understand someone's pain without accepting their mistreatment. You can recognize their struggles without allowing those struggles to become an excuse for manipulation. Most importantly, pay attention to what they repeatedly do. Words can be beautiful, convincing, emotional, and perfectly timed, but behavior tells you much more. When someone's promises and actions continually contradict one another, believe the pattern instead of continuing to believe the promise. Do not ignore the warning signs simply because accepting them hurts. Sometimes people lie to themselves because the truth feels more painful than the illusion. They may tell themselves, "They didn't really mean it. They will change eventually," or "Maybe I am expecting too much." But eventually, you have to become honest about what you are experiencing. Ask yourself what this person's behavior consistently produces in your life. Do you feel respected, safe, valued, and understood? Or do you constantly feel confused, anxious, exhausted, and responsible for keeping the relationship stable? Your emotional experience contains information. Once you stop dismissing those signals, the situation can become much clearer. You begin recognizing manipulation for what it is, instead of constantly searching for excuses to make it acceptable. The moment you begin seeing through the performance, the dynamic changes. You notice the contradictions you previously overlooked. You recognize when affection is being used to regain control. You notice when an apology is followed by the same behavior. You see when blame is being transferred, and when the conversation is deliberately redirected away from accountability. Most importantly, you realize that the image the narcissist presents is not necessarily the whole person. That awareness gives you something extremely valuable: clarity. You no longer have to depend entirely on what they tell you, because you are observing the pattern for yourself. Once you can see the manipulation without becoming consumed by it, you become much harder to control. And when that happens, the healthiest response may not be to keep fighting them at all, but to create distance, protect your peace, and move your life in a direction where their influence becomes smaller and smaller. Instead of allowing a narcissist's presence to shake your confidence, you can choose to let the experience strengthen your clarity and judgment. The strongest position is not pretending that everything is fine, or waiting for the narcissist to suddenly become a different person. It is taking off the emotional blinders and looking at the situation exactly as it is. Radical honesty with yourself may hurt at first, but it also gives you freedom. Narcissists often resist genuine change because changing would require them to acknowledge patterns they would rather deny. Your responsibility is not to transform them, Your responsibility is to remain connected to your own values. When you refuse to let their anger, manipulation, or cruelty determine your character, they lose one of their greatest advantages. You become harder to provoke, easier to trust, and much more difficult to control. Toxic people often become confused when they encounter someone who refuses to participate in their emotional games. They may know how to deal with people who become angry, defensive, desperate, or overly eager to prove themselves, but they may struggle when you remain calm and authentic. This is why your attention needs to move away from changing them and toward building the life you actually want. Continue developing yourself, strengthening your confidence, protecting your peace, and behaving according to your own moral standards. You do not have to expose every lie personally or convince everyone around you of what happened. Sometimes consistency reveals more than confrontation ever could. Over time, contradictions become visible, patterns become obvious, and people can begin recognizing the difference between someone's public image and their private behavior. Your role is simply to remain grounded while reality speaks for itself. One of the most powerful tools you have when dealing with narcissistic behavior is silence. Silence does not mean weakness, fear, or surrender. It means you are no longer volunteering your emotional energy for an interaction that is designed to exhaust you. If a narcissist sends a message specifically to provoke you, you do not automatically have to respond. If they attempt to restart an argument that has already gone nowhere, you can choose not to participate. Your lack of engagement communicates that their tactics no longer have the same effect. They may be accustomed to receiving immediate reactions, explanations, emotional outbursts, or attempts to repair everything. When those reactions disappear, the dynamic changes. You are showing them through your behavior that you are not an easy source of attention, and that you will not allow yourself to be pulled into endless conflict. There is an important distinction, however, between healthy silence and using silence as another form of manipulation. Your purpose should not be to punish the narcissist or make them desperate. Your purpose should be to protect yourself. If communicating with someone repeatedly leads to disrespect, confusion, threats, or emotional exhaustion, reducing contact can become a practical boundary. You do not need to announce every boundary dramatically. Sometimes you simply stop engaging in conversations that serve no useful purpose. Stay away from unnecessary confrontations and avoid people who repeatedly treat you with contempt, dishonesty, or deliberate disrespect. The less access someone has to your emotional reactions, the fewer opportunities they have to control your state of mind. Your peace becomes more important than proving a point. Eventually, you may realize that you do not need to defeat them at all. You simply need to stop allowing their behavior to dominate your life. Another important step is keeping accurate records when your circumstances require it. If you're dealing with repeated accusations, contradictory statements, threatening messages, financial disputes, workplace problems, or other serious situations, written documentation can help you maintain a clear record of what actually occurred. Save relevant emails, messages, letters, and other communications, rather than relying entirely on memory. Documentation can become especially valuable when someone repeatedly changes their story and later insists that a conversation never happened. You do not need to constantly argue about who said what when you have an objective record available. At the same time, documentation should be used responsibly and for your own protection, not as a weapon for creating more conflict. When a situation becomes serious, having clear information can help you communicate more effectively and make better decisions instead of getting lost in emotional arguments. Do not rush the process of seeing a narcissistic pattern clearly. Sometimes people expect the truth to become obvious overnight. But reality does not always work that way. It can take time for inconsistencies to become visible to others. A narcissist may carefully maintain an image for months or even years, especially when they are skilled at presenting themselves differently to different people. But eventually, repeated behavior creates patterns. Stories stop matching. Promises fail to become actions. Different people begin noticing similar experiences. What once seemed like isolated incidents can eventually form a recognizable picture. You do not have to force that process. Strengthen your own resolve and allow time to reveal what you cannot control. Patience is not about waiting for revenge. It is about refusing to destroy your peace while trying to make everyone else see what you already understand. You should also release the belief that you are responsible for exposing or correcting every narcissist you encounter. Not every battle belongs to you. Sometimes the healthiest decision is to step away and allow people to make their own observations. If someone has repeatedly demonstrated dishonesty or manipulation, those patterns eventually become difficult to hide. Your job is not to spend every day collecting evidence against them or convincing strangers that they are exactly who you believe them to be. Put that energy into rebuilding yourself. Create healthier relationships. Develop stronger boundaries. Learn what you will and will not accept. Give yourself permission to stop carrying responsibility for another adult's choices. The more you detach from the need for them to change, apologize, admit everything, or face consequences immediately, the more emotional freedom you gain. Letting go does not mean what happened was acceptable. It means you refuse to let it control your future. One of the greatest protections against narcissistic attacks is a strong sense of identity. When you genuinely know who you are, insults have less power over you. A smear campaign may still hurt, lies may still frustrate you, and name-calling may still feel cruel. But they do not automatically become your definition of yourself. Narcissistic individuals may attempt to make you question your intelligence, appearance, character, loyalty, or worth, because undermining your confidence can make you easier to control. That is why rebuilding your self-image matters so much. Remember the person you were before their criticism became part of your daily life. Reconnect with your values, your interests, your accomplishments, your friendships, and the parts of yourself that existed before the relationship became emotionally overwhelming. The goal is not to prove that you are better than them. The goal is to remember that their opinion was never the final authority on your worth. Healing also requires bringing your attention back to the people and experiences that genuinely nourish you. Spend time with individuals who treat you with respect and who do not require you to constantly defend your feelings or justify your existence. Rebuild trust in your own judgment, one decision at a time. When you have spent a long period around manipulation, even ordinary choices can begin to feel uncertain because you became accustomed to questioning yourself. Give yourself permission to make decisions without seeking approval from the person who previously controlled the emotional environment. You may still have difficult days, and you may still remember painful moments, but progress comes from repeatedly choosing yourself. You do not have to become cold or stop caring about people. You simply need to learn that compassion does not require self-abandonment, and kindness does not mean tolerating abuse. If this message helped you understand narcissistic behavior from a clearer perspective, share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Your story may help someone else recognize a pattern they have been struggling to understand. And if you want more content from Narcissist Mind about narcissistic manipulation, emotional boundaries, self-worth, and recovering from toxic relationship dynamics, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you do not miss future videos. The most important lesson from everything we have discussed is that you cannot build your peace around the hope that a narcissist will suddenly become accountable. You can only control your own choices, boundaries, and responses. Stay honest with yourself. Stop ignoring what the pattern is showing you. Do not waste your strength trying to win arguments that have no healthy conclusion. Your freedom begins when their behavior no longer determines who you become.